him in this spot. So who was the third choice of Borglum to be represented on this mountain?
Jefferson?
Thomas Jefferson, that's right. And what was the document that Lincoln loved so much, that Jefferson was the author of?
Declaration of Independence.
That's right. Jefferson was the principal author of the Declaration of Independence. And this document inspired freedom lovers all over the globe. Even to this day, revolutions have been started for freedom based on the writings of this document. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that chief among those are the right of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So Jefferson gave his whole life to the creation of a social democracy. He was responsible for freedoms of the press, freedoms of religion, and the choice of a man and woman, or the right of a man and a woman, to have a trial by an impartial jury in the law. Jefferson pioneered all these causes. And the main reason, though, that Jefferson is put on this mountain, he represents another thing of the four that I told you about at the beginning of this talk. Does anyone know what that is? Expansion, that's right. Jefferson is responsible for the Louisiana Purchase. And quite a neat thing happened in 1802. The farmers along the eastern side of the Mississippi River had a right to deposit their goods down in the port of New Orleans, their farm goods to be sold out throughout the world. And the Spanish had control of New Orleans at that time. They were going to cede it to the French. But the Spanish financial person in charge suspended that right of deposit for American farmers. And Jefferson was very alarmed about this because he knew that Napoleon, the French, Napoleon would be coming in and taking control of this area when the Spanish ceded it to France. And he was worried, very worried about Napoleon using this leverage to try to split our nation by enticing the farmers to join allegiance with France in order to have their right to ship their goods out to the rest of the world. And so Jefferson wanted to buy the port of New Orleans. And as a good negotiator, he didn't really show his whole hand. He, in all the documents that he wrote, letters, official correspondences to his diplomats in France, he only let on that he was interested in buying the port of New Orleans. But secretly, in the winter of 1803, he was planning the trip of Lewis and Clark to explore the vast region west of the Mississippi. He was also interested in having that land, but he never showed his hand on that. And when he sent his negotiators to try to buy New Orleans, he knew that Napoleon would need money because Napoleon was going to have a war against Great Britain. And so he approached Napoleon about buying the port of New Orleans. And Napoleon surprised his two diplomats that were there to actually offer them the whole Louisiana territory. Now, at this time, Jefferson was in America, his diplomats were in Europe, and they didn't have cell phones at the time. They had boats. That's how they communicated. And they were authorized to spend only $6 million to buy the port of New Orleans, and if they could get the other land, that would be great. $6 million. And what happened was the two guys were on their own over there. Napoleon offered them the whole territory, and they dickered on some price, and they came to $15 million. Well, at that time, they took it upon themselves to sign that treaty. And April 30th of 1803, the Louisiana Purchase Treaty was signed. And I don't know about you, but if I had to go back to my boss and tell him that I spent 2.5 more times what I was authorized to, I think I'd be a little worried. But Jefferson was okay with it because it was a good deal. They ended up getting all the land for 3 cents an acre. Now that encompassed Louisiana, Texas, from the Gulf of Mexico all the way to the Canadian border in this present state you're standing in, the Dakotas, Montana, and all the land in between. And it was unprecedented in human history at that time to actually buy an empire, and that's essentially what Jefferson did. He doubled the size of our nation. And with that, he did another thing. He essentially removed the threat of the powers that be at that time from having a foothold on our continent. France and Britain and Spain and Russia were no longer a threat on our continent because of this vast area of ground that we had purchased. So Jefferson's known for the expansion of our country. And the fourth person, who was a controversial choice to be on this mountain, was actually known for the growth of our country, for our growth as a great and powerful nation. And who knows who that fourth person is?
Teddy Roosevelt.
That's right, Teddy Roosevelt. And why was he controversial as a choice?
Well, he did a lot of very controversial things, such as the establishment of national park sites and environmental things, and he was, I can't remember if he was for the rights of workers or not.
Yeah, yes, very good. He was a champion of the little man, which is one reason why he was put on this mountain. Calvin Coolidge wanted him on this mountain, and Borglum wanted him on this mountain. Calvin Coolidge thought there were no presidents up until that time who really fought for the right of the workers. But he was controversial as a choice on this mountain for another reason, and that's because Roosevelt died in 1919 and this mountain project was begun in 1925. So they felt that history might not have enough time to judge him great or not great. So that's one of the reasons that he was very controversial as a choice. But when Calvin Coolidge, President of the United States, signed in on wanting Roosevelt, that was it. It was a done deal. And Roosevelt's life actually began as a struggle. As a young child, he struggled for every breath he took as an infant. His father used to hold him in his arms at night and walk him around the house just to try to keep him breathing. He was in such bad shape. Eventually they got him into some physical exercises. He became a very robust young man. He loved the outdoors and hunting and fishing. And he actually became a boxer, which would end up suiting him well for his later role in our country. He was controversial as a police commissioner. He started out as a police commissioner in New York City. And he used to sneak around in a disguise at night to spy on his fellow cops because they had rampant drunkenness throughout the police force at that time. And Teddy Roosevelt also did things because he thought they were right and he wanted to do the right thing. He ended up standardizing weapons for these police officers. At that time, they had to buy their own guns. So he ended up standardizing their guns and shaping that force into a better police force than it had been when he took over. He also was Undersecretary of the Navy. And he later became governor of New York. Now, he started being controversial in this role as governor because he didn't listen to the big Republican Party bosses that were in charge of the Republican machine in New York State. And he actually went up against the corporate monopolies at that time. He started his trust-busting ways. And he started fighting for the rights of the working man and changing labor laws and establishing child labor laws. So the Republican bosses, who were, of course, were run by the big corporate monopolies, wanted to get him out of their hair. And they thought of a plan to get Roosevelt out of the governorship, and they offered him a choice to run as vice president, and essentially got him elected as vice president to President McKinley. But after McKinley was elected, 6 months later, McKinley was assassinated. So guess what? Teddy Roosevelt was back in their hair again, only in a bigger way. And he ended up really becoming a trust buster and really going against the corporate monopolies and instituting national labor laws, protecting children from having to work and having long hours. He instituted protections for the meat industry, the meat packing industry, so that we could have better meat, and pharmaceuticals, regulations for the pharmaceutical company. companies. He also